Welcome back, legends. I hope you're all fantastic. It is time for another installment of Monday Q&A. There's been a little time between drinks on these Q&A videos. I've been here in Sydney since the end of May, playing with Club Cabaret. Before that, we did the Malmsteen Australian tour, which you would have seen a bunch of videos about. I've been trying to keep up, doing some live streams, putting stuff on my socials, but I've been hanging out to do a Q&A video because I look forward to these every week. And this video is powered by the amazing people who support me over on Patreon. If you'd like to become a patron, you can get access to some exclusive content like backing tracks, lessons, guitar tab, and the ability to submit questions for these patron-only Q&As. Everything you need to know is linked in the video description, along with the music that I make with my band Ragdoll. I also just want to say thank you to everybody who continues to watch and support the channel. We ticked over 100,000 subscribers here. That's something I never would have imagined when I started making YouTube videos. So I just want to say thank you. Now it's time to rip into some questions. First question comes from Rummy. Rummy has been listening to a bunch of old school Van Halen, Scorpions, and stuff from the golden era of rock guitar, and they notice there is a lot of room or plate reverb on those tones, and often just room mics as well. How do I feel about adding some room simulation, basically to take the in-your-faceness out of a guitar sound? I personally love it. I basically always have a plate reverb with a really low mix and maybe 1.5 to 2 seconds of decay on my fractal presets. Recently, I've actually been using the large room reverb in there. I think the decay is around 1.2 seconds with the mix at about 20% for the Club Cabaret show, just because having the guitar blasting at me from monitors with that kind of close mic'd tone, you know, it's just a little bit too much sometimes, and adding a bit of room can, I don't know, it just places the guitar slightly back when it's coming out of a speaker. And thinking of reverb as something that you can use to place a instrument of any kind, whether using it on guitar, drums, vocals, just controlling how upfront or push back it is a really classic technique. Also, if you're miking up a real guitar amp, an absolutely classic technique is to close mic it and then to use a room mic and blend a little bit of the room in just to give you some width and vibe. This next one comes from Roy Thomas Bow. Roy wants to know, how would I go about getting some Marshall in a box style sounds running a Fractal FM3 into a pair of clean amps? I've actually set up a few rigs for clients over the last couple of years where they're using Fender amps or Fender style amps, and they've just replaced their small pedal boards with an FM3. And I think it's a great way to roll. A couple of drive models that immediately come to mind. I mean, just the classic Tube Screamer, and then using the built-in EQ to play around with the low end and the mid-range on there. I mean, it always sounds good with Fender style amps, and the fact that Fractal give you the ability to tweak so much more than the real pedal is awesome. There is the Love pedal, I think it's in there, called like the Heart pedal or something like that, which is a great Marshall style pedal in the real world, and the drive sounds excellent. I think the Sir Riot models are also fantastic, more for the kind of high gain, juicy, modded Marshall style thing. The other thing that you can do, and I do have a video about this, is you can use one of the amp blocks and try like one of the Marshall JCM 800 models, or try a Friedman, just disable the power amp sim in there. So you're just using the preamp. And when I started out with rack gear, like got an 88 MP1, didn't know anything about how to run it. I used to run it into a clean Marshall and actually got some pretty cool sounds. I definitely prefer it into the effects return these days. But again, in the FM3, you can just turn the power amp simulation off, or you can leave it on, because with all of these things, there are no rules. I mean, you could try a cranked plexi, which at the end of the day, what all these Marshall in a box pedals are trying to replicate, but you've got a really accurate digital model of the whole thing and pump it into the front of your clean amp. All I would say is just play around with the overall level going into the amp and like balance out the amp volume and drive with the drive from the FM3. This one comes from longtime supporter and friend of the channel, Rutger. Seemingly straightforward question. My top 3 guitar tones of all time. This is going to depend on what time of the day it is, what day of the week it is, what month of the year it is, but I figured the way I'm going to answer this is I'm going to tell you 3 guitar sounds which were really impactful for me. Like, they changed the way I thought about the instrument and what you can do with it. And the first one that comes to mind is tie table. Like, any tie table guitar tone, whether it's from the first couple of albums, in particular Gretchen Goes to Nebraska. I just love everything King's X, and Ty just has this super unique guitar sound. I think my personal favorite tie table guitar tone is the guitar sound he's got on Dogman, because that was really the album that I listened to a lot where I went, oh, this is how you can be in a heavy three-piece band with a singing bass player. This is what you do with the guitar sound. This is how you play. You know, kind of provided a template that really just kind of changed the way I thought about playing in my own band, Ragdoll, three-piece with a singing bass player. Like, how do you fill space? And Dogman to me is just one of the greatest rock albums of all time. Ty's guitar sound on there, and the way it fits together with Doug's bass tone and the drum tone on there, Brendan O'Brien's production is phenomenal. I think it's really important with guitar tones to contextualize them. You know, what sounds great playing in your living room may not sound great in a mix with a band. But for me, Tie Table was so important because it was like, hey, go out there, find your thing, and lean into what's great about your thing. You know, just go out and express yourself and be yourself. So in listening to a lot of King's X, I've never really tried to replicate the sound. I've more gone, oh, it's about finding your own sound. So that's why Tie Table, and in particular Dogman, and probably Gretchen Goes to Nebraska and the first King's X album, Out of the Silent Planet, was so important in my musical development. Another three-piece, and so many of you are going to agree with me here, obviously Alex Lifeson from Rush, massively influential player for me, but in particular the song Limelight and the way he uses texture and the way the guitar solo just tugs on your heartstrings, the way everything works to support that song. Again, it was something that I heard where I was like, I can't believe you can do this with only 3 human beings playing their instruments. So that one's really important. And then the third one, you know, I've thought about a couple of really important guitar sounds in my life that I've come across. And, you know, for me, I always kind of explain like my eruption moment, you know, where you hear the guitar and you go, I can't believe that can be done, was probably listening to the Racer X song Frenzy, and then watching the Paul Gilbert instructional video. So that one was really important. And, you know, I don't think it's like my favorite guitar tone ever, but just the sheer conviction and aggression with which Paul plays, and that kind of washed out chorusy ADA thing's really important. Hearing Yngwie for the first time obviously was super important. I still love Yngwie's guitar sound. Gary Moore still got the blues. I remember hearing that, and I remember hearing the song Walking by Myself, and just the fact that guitar sound is kind of so raw and in your face, and it's kind of him trying to do the Clapton Beano thing, but you know, Gary does it in Gary's way, and it's just phenomenal. Also the Thin Lizzy live album, Live and Dangerous, that kind of got me into playing guitar. Really, really important in my musical development. But I think the thing that made me want to be a rock guitar player and pursue heavy tones was Chris Oliva. So I'm going to say the Sabotage song, Edge of Thorns. It's the first Sabotage song that I ever heard, and just that rhythm guitar tone, I was like, oh, I like this. I like this a lot. I want to do that. Also, Zakk Wylde, No More Tears, that was really important. So much stuff from the late 80s, early 90s, but if I had to pick any 3, it would be, yeah, probably Tie Table or Dogman. I'm going to go Alex Lifeson, Limelight, all of Moving Pictures is phenomenal, and Grace Under Pressure and Signals, so good. Desert Island Discs, for sure. And then Chris Oliva, Edge of Thorns, there you go. I'd probably give you a different answer tomorrow, though. This one comes from Mark Carlton. Mark is using the Revv Tilt Overdrive, fantastic pedal, which I've demoed on the channel before. Shout out to Revv. They make some amazing products, and I can't wait to try out some more of their stuff on the channel. But Mark has been using the Revv basically, you know, to kind of tighten up his overall guitar sound, take out some mud or take out some brightness. I think the whole Tilt EQ thing is fantastic. It's basically kind of like a high shelf and a low shelf at the same time. So if you think, you know, imagine a little graph of a shelving filter, right? It kind of just kicks up. Imagine while you're boosting one, you're cutting the other. So Mark wants to know if I've ever played around with that in the Fractal. There is a Tilt EQ in the Fractal, and one of my favorite tricks is emulating the Fortin Grind or the TC integrated preamp. You can go on the forum and look up the settings, but from memory, I feel like it's a tilt filter with 10 dB of gain and around 300-ish hertz or something like that, and then boost the overall level. Fantastic with low-tuned guitars because you're taking out a lot of that low-end energy that's going to hit the front of the amp and kind of make it flub out and be muddy. But yeah, even just a simple low-pass filter can be great as well in there, or a low shelf. And now I'm trying to remember if I said low pass or low shelf before, but it's a high shelf and a low shelf. That's kind of a tilt EQ. Classic trick. It's like a seesaw, you know? Oh, I want things to be a little less muddy. Take out a bit of low end, add a bit of high end, or vice versa. It's a fantastic trick. We've got 2 questions from George Scavelis next. I actually met George at the Sydney show when we were doing the Yngwie tour. George was very eagle-eyed and noticed that Ryan was wearing a Pantera shirt. Was that like a subtle dig at Yngwie? I have absolutely no idea, but we all have to admit that's kind of funny that he chose to do that. I do know that Ryan took his eldest son to see Pantera in Adelaide not long before we did the Yngwie show. So, you know, maybe he just happened to pack that t-shirt, but, you know, I don't want to speak in his place or anything like that. So we'll leave that one open-ended. The other one George wanted to know about was the Roland FC300. So it's still quite an expensive controller, 2 expression pedals, does a whole bunch of MIDI stuff. Can I do a video about it? I'd be happy to, but I feel like that style of controller now has kind of been surpassed by what you can get from companies like Pirate MIDI, who we just did a podcast with. Would highly recommend you go and check that one out. Or, you know, Morningstar or your RJM, where they're just so much more user-friendly. And I don't doubt that the Roland FC300 is really powerful, but most modern MIDI controllers will give you way more connectivity options in there. You can connect your own expression pedals. And if you only need 1 expression pedal and not 2, just bring 1 and connect it. If you want to use that port for MIDI over TRS, you can do something like that. Furthermore, a lot of these kind of newer MIDI controllers, they come with pre-programmed libraries. You don't have to go in and program all the MIDI. You just go, oh, I'm using an FM3, I'm using an HX Stomp. There we go. I'll just bring up the presets and you can go and have a blast. So George, if you've got any other questions or you want to reminisce about that Sydney show, let me know in the comments. This one comes from Marek. Marek is pretty new to using digital products like the FM3. What's the best way to hook up a Big Sky with an FM3? My personal choice, Marek, would be to set the Big Sky to kill dry routing. So it's only going to be 100% wet. And then using the input and output 2 blocks, you can connect a parallel chain to your main signal on the FM3. And you could use, say, the input 2 block to control the amount of mix going into your fractal. The reason this is handy is you're saving an extra stage of analog to digital and digital to analog conversion, which just adds up to more latency. So you're not going to be adding any more latency to your signal. You can blend those reverbs in. And then you've also got the flexibility of placing them before the amp and cab or after the amp and cab. I do have a video about doing this with some external effects. If you'd like me to put one together with the Big Sky, because I've got one at home, and the FM3, please let me know. One last question from longtime supporter of the channel, Roger Lamson. Roger also makes amazing guitars with rubato guitars, and I'm playing the rubato Lassie for this run of Club Cabaret shows. So shout out to Roger. Roger wants to know any more stories that I have regarding rock stars or some of my idols. I have been pretty lucky where I haven't really had any terrible, awkward moments with those kind of things. And we've done quite a few supports for international bands, and we've supported some pretty big bands when we've toured overseas. A couple of my favorites would be getting to hang out with the one and only Doug Pinnick from King's X. We went and ate ribs at Universal Studios on a Thursday night with Doug, and then he came to our show with Skid Row. At that show, Dave Snake Sabo also thought our slap band coolers that we had were the coolest piece of merch he'd ever seen. And I said to him, I was like, oh, Dave, you know, I have to say, when I heard that first Skid Row album, I think it was like 15 or something like that, getting into hair metal, I was like, it arrived at a really important time in my life. And he just goes, yeah, it arrived at a really important time in my life as well, which I thought was pretty awesome. We opened for Winger a couple of years ago, right before COVID, and getting to hang out with Kip was pretty cool. And Ryan's got a Jackson Kip Winger bass, and he sort of showed him and was like, dude, can you sign my bass? And Kip was like, man, I don't even have one of those anymore. It got stolen. So Ryan offered to give him the bass, but he was like, I don't have the extra luggage or anything like that. So that was really, really cool. And probably one of the coolest for me was opening for Living Colour. that first Living Colour album, Vivid, was one of the first albums I ever heard when I got into playing guitar. My dad owned it, let me listen to it. Vernon's playing still blows my mind. They're an incredible live band. And he watched our entire set when we opened for him. And when we came off, he gave Ryan a big hug and hung out after the show. Met my wife, met my dad. We've got a photo together that my dad keeps on, the mantelpiece with all the family photos. So yeah, shout out to Vernon and all of Living Colour for just being not only amazing musicians, but amazing people as well. So yeah, I feel like I'm name dropping at the moment. I've just been very, very fortunate over the years to have some of these experiences. So one last one, though. We were playing a gig in Kalgoorlie, and any Australians here will no doubt know who Scott Cam is. He's like a TV handyman personality. He hosts a show called The Block, and he walked into this gig on a Thursday night that we were playing. We were like, oh my God, Scott Cam. Scott, what can we do for you? Let's play a song. And he turns around and goes, you boys know any Chisel? And of course we didn't know any Chisel, so we played some Led Zeppelin, and he was super disappointed. And on that note, I'm going to say thank you to everybody who's left a comment for this Q&A. If you'd like me to answer any of your questions on the next Q&A, drop them in the comments below. Links to my Patreon and the music I make in the video description below. I've got to go and play a show right now, so take care of yourselves, keep it greasy, go and make some glorious guitar noises, and I'll see you on the next one.